Welcome back to Forge College. Let's dive right into today's explainer. In our last lesson, you got your hands dirty creating and managing wallets using the Solana CLI. But today, we're pivoting. We're going to tear down the actual mechanical blueprints of blockchain transactions to see exactly how they tick under the hood. Before we get grease all over our hands in the mempool, here's our schematic for today. We'll be looking at the transaction blueprint, the UTXO and account models, concurrency workflows, security hazards, and then we'll wrap it all up with a final format comparison.
Section 1. The Transaction Blueprint, or as I like to call it, the parts list of Web3 engines.
To really understand these engines, we need a slight shift in perspective. Think of transaction fields not just as boring lines of code, but as mechanical carriers of intent and authority. At a high level, we've got two completely distinct models. Over on the left is the UTXO system, which is what Bitcoin uses. It spends discrete referenced outputs. It's kind of like a vending machine that only takes exact change. You put in a specific coin, you get your item, and boom, you get exact change back. On the right, we have the account model, famously used by Ethereum. This system mutates a centralized, global balance. Honestly, it's exactly like running a tab at your favorite bar. You have a balance, and every time you order a drink, the bartender just updates your running total. Simple, right?
Moving to Section 2, the UTXO schematic, discrete inputs and outputs.
All right, put your hard hats on for this one, because we're examining the exact components that make up a UTXO transaction schematic. The crucial mechanisms you'll see here are the prev-TX-ID and prev-index. These fields explicitly and strictly bind your input to a prior unspent output. Because it points to a very specific, unique coin from the past, the validation is completely localized and exact. Basically, if that specific coin is unspent at the exact moment of validation, your input works. No questions asked.
But here's the catch. How do you actually prove you own that exact change coin? Well, that's where the witness comes into play. A witness is the per-input authorization material. We're talking cryptographic signatures and public keys that literally prove you have the right to spend it. And this brilliantly illustrates a really cool structural quirk of UTXO. Because witnesses are per input, multiple different parties can jointly fund a single transaction just by supplying their own different input witnesses. It's literally like 5 friends all throwing their exact change onto the counter at the exact same time to buy one giant pizza together.
Section 3. The account model diagram, global state and nonces.
Shifting gears over to the account model blueprint. Here, absolutely everything revolves around a single sender altering a global state. You've got your to and value fields, gas limitations, and your to, R, and S signatures down at the bottom. Unlike UTXO, where each individual input has its own witness, here, a single signature binds the sender to the entire message. And those gas fields? They dictate the exact execution cost for the network to process and update your bar tab. And then there is the nonce. This is a monotonic counter enforcing per-sender transaction ordering. It's basically what stops a malicious bartender from taking your "charge me for one beer" message and maliciously submitting it 10 times in a row while you aren't looking. But listen, here is a major warning label. Loose nonces cause memtool races. This single incrementing number is entirely responsible for keeping your transaction sequence orderly against a constantly changing global state. If you mess up your nonce, your transactions are going to get stuck, or worse, they'll execute out of the order you intended. Total nightmare. Okay, Section 4. Concurrency and workflows. The 7-step validation pipeline. So how do these two engines actually run when you turn the key? Let's trace a validation pipeline they both use. Steps 1 through 4 are essentially identical for both blueprints. The network accepts the raw bytes, parses the fields, verifies the signatures, and checks the resource limits, like your gas and fees. Honestly, it's just standard intake and verification procedure. Nothing too dramatic happening quite yet. But steps 5 and 6? This is where these two engines wildly diverge. At step 5, UTXO checks if that exact referenced output is unspent. It's a localized Boolean check, yes or no. Then in step 6, it does an atomic consume and create. The account system, however, reads your global account balance and nonce in step 5, and then updates that mutable balance globally in step 6. So one is simply replacing a specific unspent flag, while the other is overwriting a massive global spreadsheet. Moving on to Section 5, Security Hazards. Danger, double spends, and malleability.
Time for a quick workplace safety briefing. How do these structural choices actually expose us to different security vulnerabilities? Specifically, If a hacker tries to spend the exact same money twice, how does the underlying code of each engine react to the attack?
Well, here's how they stack up. UTXO handles double spends cleanly via direct atomic conflict. If two transactions reference the exact same prev_tx ID, the moment one is consumed, the other instantly fails. It is physically impossible to put the same exact change coin into two vending machines at once. But the account model? That has to rely on messy mempool ordering and nonces. If two transactions with the same nonce hit the network, it's a literal race. Miners might just pick the one with the higher gas fee, leaving your security entirely reliant on sequence management.
Then we have malleability. This is the ability for an attacker to alter a transaction serialization without actually invalidating the cryptographic signature itself. Remember those per-input witnesses we loved in UTXO for joint funding? Yeah, they unfortunately increase your malleability risk. Because the signature might not cover every single byte of the transaction, an attacker could tweak the transaction ID. And that is exactly why UTXO systems require strict canonical encoding rules to keep attackers from altering things mid-flight.
Finally, Section 6, Final Format Comparison, the definitive safety checklist.
Let's summarize our blueprint teardown into a really handy checklist for your engineering toolkit. As you can see mapped out here, we can directly link specific transaction fields to the security trade-offs they create. UTXO uses prev_xid to mitigate localized double spends. The account model uses the nonce to mitigate identical replays and enforce strict ordering. When you look at a transaction format through this lens, you instantly see what attacks it's naturally defended against.
Let's lock in 3 core principles before we wrap up today. Principle 1, reference versus mutable authority. Remember, UTXO references give you much simpler localized spentness checks. Account mutable nonces, on the other hand, demand active, client-side ordering management. One is looking backward to an exact reference, the other is continuously updating the present state.
Principle 2, witness placement drives malleability risk. Those per-input witnesses offer amazing flexibility for sure, but they require strict canonical rules to avoid those nasty malleability and replay attacks. Single signature account models definitely reduce those vectors, but at the cost of centralizing authority to one single signing key for the whole message.
And Principle 3, visibility windows shape client strategies. Ultimately, your strategy as a developer has to follow the format. If you're building for UTXO, your logic is going to focus heavily on tracking output selection and avoiding conflicting unconfirmed spends. But if you're building for accounts, you're managing nonces and writing logic for fee bumping in the mempool.
So now that you know the intricate mechanics under the hood, when you go to build your next app, what's it going to be? Will you choose the atomic, unyielding precision of the UTXO vending machine or the fluid, global flexibility of the account bar tab? You got to weigh this carefully because the wrong choice could cost you everything. Anyway, thanks for joining this explainer made by Forge College. Be sure to visit forge.college to master even more Web3 engineering concepts. Keep building, stay curious, and we'll see you next time.